responsible tourism. I'm not saying anything about the monetary aspects. I'm just talking about the values and the meaning of those values to the community that you're operating in. To me, that's the most important part of responsible tourism.
If you could sum it up into 2 or 3 sentences,
okay.
How would you phrase that?
Okay. Responsible tourism consists of respecting the values of the community that you're doing tourism in. And if it's an indigenous community, you have to learn what those values are. And they usually apply to respect for the people, for the land, and for the cultures that are there. That's responsible tourism.
That was really great. There was just that alarm that kind of went off. I don't know, did you hear that, the alarm?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't mind, if I could just get you to speak a little bit more about that, where we don't have the alarm.
Okay. All right. When we're talking about responsibilities and responsible tourism, the essence of that in indigenous communities is to know and respect the values of the community that you're operating in. Because indigenous people, they know when they are not being respected, and they don't. Let me start over on that again. The essence of responsible tourism lies in recognizing and in respecting the values of the community that you're operating in, and especially important for indigenous communities. Those values consist of respect, compassion, hospitality, generosity. Those are all values that we see in indigenous communities. And unfortunately, outside agencies don't always act that way. They don't always respect those values.
That was good.
I was thinking last night that I don't want to approach it strictly from a negative standpoint. I don't want to say this is bad shit, you know, and I want to be able to say these are the kind of values that must be adopted and practiced for dealing with indigenous communities. And the absence of those values means that that is not a good tourism operation, in my opinion. So I want to start with the positive, you know.
Yeah, I think that there can be, you know, an ideal that we can work towards.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I think that's really positive, you know, because we want to encourage people to do better. And we don't do better just by acknowledging the bad, but we do better by making recommendations,
right,
you know, for how things can be done,
yes,
done better.
Yeah. During the tourism, during our history in the 20th century, we found a lot of people beginning to have an interest in Indian communities, Native communities across the United States. And tour companies started bringing tourists into our villages, into our communities, into our pueblos, and they did not do it respectfully. They came in, usually in busloads, and they would invade the community. They would very often leave their trash, if possible, without buying anything, without compensating the community for what they were doing there. So we developed a negative feeling about tourism for quite some time. And now we're trying to approach tourism in our communities from a very positive perspective, so that we talk about values, we talk about ethics, we talk about etiquette, and try to convince our visitors and the people who are bringing those visitors that those values are very important to us. So we try to be positive about how we communicate those values, hoping that tour organizers, tour operators will adopt those values, at least for the people that they are bringing into our communities.
What would those values be, you know, I mean, in terms of, you know, if you were to synthesize those values into 3 or 5 points, like what are the positive values that travelers and tour operators should have?
Probably the most important value that is embedded deeply in our indigenous cultures is that feeling of kinship for everything on the earth. And this kinship extends to all things on the earth, not only other human beings, but for the animals, the rocks, the streams, the air, the water. This feeling of kinship and closeness to those parts of the natural world are so important to us that those things are so important to indigenous communities that they permeate every aspect of our lives, including our spiritual practices, including our relationships with each other. I didn't do that very well, but
I thought that sounded quite good. If you want to take another go, I mean, I'm happy to.
yeah. But let me go on a little bit. When we talk about the values that are most important to indigenous communities, probably the most important one is the kinship, the feeling of kinship for other humans and for the natural world. And another important value would be that of respect, and that follows right along with these feelings of kinship, having respect for everything in our environment, having respect for each other, for the natural world. Other values that we might consider would be that of generosity and compassion. I think you get the idea that those are the values that make us all better people for each other and within our societies. I'll probably have another go at that maybe tomorrow.